We interview people from across Australia in the footprint of more than 250 Indigenous nations. We recognise and deeply respect our First Nations people, their heritage, cultural beliefs and close relationship with the land on which we walk, drive or fly over.
This podcast has been made possible with the support of Isuzu Ute Australia, a major national partner of the Royal Flying Doctor Service and also the sponsor of the Flying Doctor podcast series.
Up when you're out west, it's a complete chandelier of stars, big horizons, huge skies, and I think most importantly, the dust. The dust gets absolutely everywhere. It gets through any car door seal, it gets into any travel box imaginable, and it gets into your blood.
Just turn around as quickly as we can.
That blood pressure is not coming up.
Unload the patient.
Is it a big property?
Still breathing okay at the moment.
On a 493, understood, thank you. Put the stretcher back in, shut the door, off we go again.
This is the Flying Doctor podcast and I'm your host, Lana Howarth. Each week we fly to rural and remote communities across Australia and hear the stories of real-life patients who've needed to call on the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Are you someone that likes to get out of the city and head out bush to four-wheel drive or tour on a motorbike? There are so many people who adventure in our rural and remote areas of this vast continent, and I've interviewed several already on the Flying Doctor podcast, such as Phil Eli in episode number 49, and of course one of my most favourite interviews with Steve Treloar about the motorcycle pudding in number 28. My guest in this episode is an RFDS staff member here in Canberra with me at the RFDS Federation office, and he has a long love of getting out bush since he was a young one. Hello, Doug.
G'day, Lana. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Where did you grow up?
Look, I grew up in northwestern Sydney near a place called Windsor, so very much in the outer suburbs of Sydney on a little 5-acre block, very much described as a free-range child, I think my mother would say. In my childhood, did a lot of travelling with my family throughout Australia via road and four-wheel drives and often on tracks less travelled.
Are you from a large family?
I have my younger brother, Angus, and mum and dad, so not terribly large. I think some might say large in personality, but not in number.
Right. You know, I have long complained that my parents had my brother and I in the back of a Holden station wagon for what seemed to be every weekend to travel to some national park or winery interstate. And I complained bitterly as a child. Were you like me and just didn't like it, or did you love it from the onset to get out from Sydney and explore the bush?
Look, I think my first trips happened before I had memory, so I sort of more or less grew up with it from a very early age and was accustomed to it. My brother and I definitely had our squabbles in the back seat, who had access to the pizza shapes, for example, who had access to the favourite colouring in pens. But we also had little activities that we could do, particularly when we were in primary school. So we would sort of do projects and reports for the students back in Oakville where I went to school.
And where were your parents travelling to? What was driving their efforts to get out of Sydney?
So I think very early on in the piece, it just began with sort of weekend and long weekend trips here and there in and around Sydney and New South Wales. But I think my mum and dad, well, I know that they had a sort of pretty fundamental philosophy that they would sort of try and show us our own country. And then if we wanted to go and see the world, we could do that on our own wallet when we were older. But they wanted to, I guess, instill in us a knowledge of where we were from and just how diverse Australia is, both in terms of landscape and also communities as well. So that's definitely stayed with me. My dad was a general surgeon who worked in the public system, and he was involved with the AMA quite a lot. And during my later primary school and early high school years, if there was a conference on in Darwin, him and mum would sort of take 4 or 6 weeks off to drive up to the conference and then sort of drive back, maybe via Uluru or return via the Kimberley, that sort of thing. So a lot of those trips were structured around those conferences, but they were always used as an excuse to have a break and also to show us kids where we're from and just how special Australia is.
Do you have a lot of really fond memories of that time period of being in those vast landscapes with a horizon that just seems to go forever?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Particularly the skies and the skies at night. If you've grown up in Sydney, and I was on the outskirts of Sydney, as a kid, you don't know anything about light pollution, but you just know that when you look up and you're out west, it's a complete chandelier of stars and a very different sky to what we're used to back home. Big horizons, huge skies. And I think most importantly, the dust. The dust gets absolutely everywhere. It gets through any car door seal imaginable. It gets into any travel box imaginable, and it gets into your blood. And, even now, separate to mum and dad, in my 20s and 30s, I've done my own travels and try to do that, at least once a year because I find myself getting itchy to go out west for that red dust again. So have had plenty of funny experiences as well, mainly around things that have gone wrong and some potential disasters on trips. Those are memories that have definitely stayed with me.
Well, at what point, Doug, did you become a motorcycle rider as an adult? Because you rock up to work every day with your helmet. Have you also enjoyed helmet time on long rides on country roads?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I became a motorcyclist in my early 20s. I sort of grew up with them on the periphery. I think coming from a medical family, my parents' worst nightmare was me doing a sport like motorcycling. But I've sort of gotten into what they call adventure riding, and that's very much long open gravel roads, the occasional fire trail, that sort of thing, riding to a pub, riding to a community for a weekend and back, but also some longer trips as well, which I've both done and ridden as a support rider.
Right. And so I'd love to know some of the challenges you've run into on some of those trips.
Oh, look, anything and everything from flat tires to a rider hitting a wayward deer one time. We've also come across riders separate to our ride who have been downed, where we've actually had to contact the RFDS. A variety of things can go wrong on a motorcycle, but that's part of the fun and that's part of the adventure. Despite what people might think, you can actually do it in a pretty safe and reliable way.
When you do travel, how many people normally go together, and do you normally have a support vehicle that comes along and carries all the gear, or do you end up at sometimes just going out just with whatever is on the back of the bike?
We will often go out with whatever we can fit on the back of the bike, and that isn't much, let me tell you. So you become very conscious of weight, you become very conscious of everything's size. I'm still searching for the world's lightest hike tent that I can fit on my motorcycle. You have to carry everything, particularly if you're going unsupported without a vehicle following you. So that's everything and anything from spare tubes and engine parts to spare fluids. You also have to carry first aid kits, some form of communication. That could be a radio or a satellite phone, water, your food. Often we go with freeze dried stuff because it's a lot lighter and easier to pack for us. Toiletries, the whole range. You are very much limited by what you can fit, but that is also liberating in itself because you have to make some hard calls and really go with the bare minimums that you need to survive and enjoy the trip with a little bit of comfort.
And who do you go with? You have a bunch of mates that have been doing this for a long time?
Yeah, so I've got two friends. Shout out to James and the Dutchman who are listening, who I've done a few trips with, mainly weekend trips. But I've also done a couple of larger trips, both as a rider, but also as a support vehicle driver, up along things like the Birdsville Track and into the Simpson Desert, that sort of thing, out to Uluru as well. So I'm keen to do more of those big trips. People who drive cars and have never ridden a motorcycle, unfortunately, just don't have an appreciation for just how much more raw that experience is. You have smells of different pastures and crops that you're going through. You have smells of roadkill and dead wombat. You have magnificent cool air. You notice temperature changes as you ride through different parts of terrain. And it is just so much more in tune with the elements than driving a car is. That's part of the reason why we love it, and we also just love the freedom that comes with it.
It sounds like it's really a sensory experience. Like it's every single sense is being bombarded as you ride along. And those roads, they're not great, are they? So let's talk about roads in outback Australia.
Yeah,
They can be a bit of a challenge, even for cars. They can be a challenge.
absolutely they can. And actually, one of my most memorable experiences is traveling with my parents down a thing called the Cordillo Downs track, coming into a place called Inaminka.
In South Australia.
In South Australia, yes. And there was a water crossing on the Cordillo Downs track, which my father was navigating, and he was paying close attention to the trailer as it exited the water crossing, and he was watching this in his rearview mirrors and did not see the tree branch that was across the track. And the tree branch, unfortunately, went straight through the driver's windshield above my mother's head and showered the map that was on her lap with glass, resulted in what can best be described as a very serious discussion between mum and dad, in which mum pointed out that a tree branch had come through the windscreen, and dad pointed out that she had the map and why didn't she see the tree. So you can imagine that that things were pretty raw, because it only took a few hundred meters of that road for that front windshield to give out almost entirely. And we realized that we were better off removing it. And mum was so unimpressed with dad that she considered driving down the rest of the track. So we had sort of swim goggles, which we'd taken to swim in billabongs and stuff, on our heads to protect us from the sand and dust. We were all sort of safari style, done up with picnic rugs in the back seat and getting covered in dust ourselves. But it took another 40 minutes for mum. And if you listen to dad, he will say that she saw this rock and she deliberately lined it up, but she ran over this rock and it bounced off the trailer and took out the rear windshield. So now we're in a Land Rover Discovery without a front windshield or a rear windshield. And we ended up actually managing to pick one up a few days later in Port Augusta off a container ship, or pick up two rather, a front and a rear. But back roads, I mean, they can vary greatly. The Birdsville track, for example, I've done that probably a dozen times over the years. And I've done it when it's been as smooth as a highway, because the grade has been through a couple of days before or a week before. And you can really almost travel quite safely at speeds that are almost sort of general highway speeds. Then there are times when it's been raining or the grader hasn't been through for a while, and you can get what motorcyclists refer to as tram track ruts, which can be quite fun and interesting to negotiate. And gibbers, which are small, red, hard bits of ironstone that can sort of fit into the palm of your hand. And both riding and driving on it is sort of like riding and driving on marbles. So you've got a mixture of that, and then also bull dust, which is this really fine sort of talc sand, which, actually when a road train is coming through and you see one on the horizon, you pull over and wait for the dust to settle before you continue, because it is like driving through a thick fog. Outback road conditions can vary. We've also camped, for example, off the Tanami track in Western Australia. We're very much off the grid there. And then when a sandstorm came up in the middle of the night, and my father has a full head of white hair and a white beard, and him and I were out in the middle of the night hammering in 10 pegs, trying to hold everything down. The sandstorm was so ferocious it actually blew sand into the jets of the gas burner stove that we had and completely ruined it. But the next morning, my father looked like he'd had a pink rinse put through, kind of looked like the pink version of Papa Smurf. And because we had no showers or anything like that, we pulled into the next roadhouse, very much looking a little bit bedraggled.
Yep.
It was sort of one of those roadhouses where there was sort of, 2 or 3 people in there, and 2 of them were truck drivers. And one of them actually came over and sort of was almost reading from a bit of a script, and in his monotone voice said, excuse me, do you mind if I sit with you? I am missing my family this evening and would appreciate the company. And we were like, sure, no worries, sit down. And Charlie was his name, and Charlie ended up being an absolutely fantastic personality. He taught me how to play pool that evening, also told me he was a world champion, which was a complete lie, but I believed it at the time. And he was a truck driver, and he'd driven through that storm, and he couldn't believe that we had camped out in it and managed to make it through without losing a tent or a child. And he was quite open about that. So all these experiences really stayed with me and instilled with me sort of a love of outback travel, which I've carried through.
You've reminded me of a story from my childhood. My family used to go from Canberra down to Tumbarumba in New South Wales every Easter to visit a family down there that we were quite close with. And back then, so this is a long time ago, showing my age, we used to go on this just a ridiculous old dirt track that used to take us, I think it was something like 5 or 6 hours to get to Tumbarumba. And we had this very old Mercedes that my dad loved, but it just was so unreliable. And I've got this memory of my mum walking in front of the Mercedes with a torch because the headlights on the Mercedes had stopped working and the fog was so dense we couldn't see the sides of the road and it was dark. It must have been hours that my mum just walked in front of the car while we tried to make our way to Tumbarumba. It's ridiculous, some of the challenges that you can run into when you're out bush, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Another memory I have is sort of similar to that with mum walking in front of the car. Was we were driving towards White Cliffs. I can't remember the name of the community, but we'd driven through this community, and I have the distinct memory of mum saying, "Look behind you guys," and we both turned around in the back seat and saw that the police were closing the road behind us, and we were the last car through because they'd had this rainstorm that had come through. And sort of the 3 or 4 hours that followed was absolutely mind-blowing fun as a 7 or 8 year old in the back seat. But my father and mother were pretty terrified and putting on a brave face because we were sort of, I don't think Dad was driving. He was more along for the ride as the car plowed through about 2 foot of mud with a trailer acting like a rudder behind us. Kangaroos were trying to bounce across the track and themselves getting stuck. So at times, Mum was sort of walking out in front, up to sort of knee deep mud at points, trying to direct Dad through particularly nasty parts. She wasn't
Wow.
impressed. He insisted that he had to drive, and he couldn't walk out there because he had pants on and his shorts were in the back, and it would be difficult to unpack. So um, no one was impressed, but we loved it as children. We actually ended up marooned in White Cliffs for about a week and a half after that. During that time, everybody else who was there sort of more or less became part of the community. You know, I distinctly remember as a 7 or 8 year old walking along and seeing this rather elderly lady who was walking towards me. She commented on the hat that I was wearing, so I started talking to her. And quite innocently, as a 7 year old, sort of assuming that everyone in White Cliffs was not from White Cliffs, said, "How long have you been stuck here for?" And she looked at me and she said, 86 years. Um, and she was,
Faux pas.
yeah, she was very much a local, but it's those locals which really make these communities absolutely fantastic, and it really is a side of Australia that I think more people should see, particularly young people, so they have a realization of what goes on beyond the divide and what happens way out west.
Mm.
Have you seen any of our 7 large RFDS flight simulators as they move around Australia, attending school, community or field days? Each is being towed by an Isuzu D-Max Ute or MUX SUV, courtesy of Isuzu Ute Australia. Reliable vehicles are imperative in the harsh Australian outback, and the Isuzu D-Max and MUX vehicles are the perfect match for the long-distance heavy towing demands of these simulators right across Australia.
You're working with the Royal Flying Doctor Service now. Have you ever had to call upon or use the services of the RFDS personally?
Not personally in the sense of personally for me, but I have had some experiences with the RFDS on my travels, some more forward focus and centre focus than others. One of those trips along the Birdsville track that I referred to, I was supporting 2 friends of mine who are a little bit older than me. They'd be in their 60s now, so they would have been sort of in their late 40s, early 50s back when this happened. And I had mentioned that I was travelling from Canberra up towards a community that I used to do some volunteer work in called Dumuji, which is 6.5 hours northwest of Mount Isa in the Queensland Gulf country. And they sort of mentioned that, they'd been thinking about doing a sort of an outback trip on their bikes, but they wanted to have a support vehicle. And I said, well, you can do the Birdsville track and really Canberra to Doomadgee via Birdsville isn't really that much of a big deal when you're travelling that much of a distance.
Would you mind explaining what does a support vehicle do when you've got bike riders there and you're in the support vehicle? What are you expected to do as the driver of the car?
So I think I mentioned before that everything that you do in motorcycling adventure-wise is dependent on what you can take on the bike, and weight is key. You want that machine as lightweight as possible because they move around a lot and they're easier to control when they're lightweight. They're also easier to pick up when you fall off or drop a bike. So a support vehicle really takes that weight element out of the equation from riders and means that riders can ride with as little weight or as much weight as they like. I essentially take spare motorcycle parts, motorcycle manuals, which can actually be quite large to know how to fit the parts when things go wrong, water, fuel, first aid, communications, the lot. And I will sort of ride sometimes quite closely behind them, depending on the road, or sometimes 5 or 10 Ks back to give them a bit of space if they don't need as close shadowing.
Right.
And it sort of means that they have their own adventure and I have my own adventure along the way.
So tell me what happened on this trip.
As a motorcyclist, when you're riding along, you observe the road surface a lot more, mainly because you're looking for obstacles. And that was very much the case on this Birdsville track. And we had an intercom system set up between the bikes and I was traveling probably about 800 meters behind them when the lead bike sort of came over the radio and said that he was pretty sure that he spotted what we refer to as a tail slapper sign, which is sort of where you can see a motorcycle track which has started to shimmy like a snake across the road, and essentially means that as you're riding the bike steering geometry has come out of play and it is wobbling. You can correct this, but sooner or later it gets to a no return point and the inevitable will happen and you will come off the bike. So he had pulled up because he'd ridden past this, and I'd slowed down and looked out my mirror and I noticed what he was talking about, and then I noticed what appeared to be a lock-up mark where someone had locked up their rear tyre, and it was sort of heading towards the edge of the road where there was a little culvert off to the side of it. And as I followed this track with my eyes and into the culvert, I saw 2 legs in motorcycle boots and in motorcycle pants. So I started, blasting the horn and was on the radio to the guys, and they quickly rode back. I got out of the car and we found a rider who actually had ridden past us a few hours prior when we were fueling up. He was riding solo. His bike was a 1200 Tenere, which is quite a heavy bike, but built for that sort of outback touring. This rider was essentially just unlucky. His front wheel had caught a stone, and he had suffered a tail slapping experience that he couldn't rectify or pull out from, and he had ended up in the ditch, and our guess was at quite a rate of pace. His helmet was quite badly grazed and damaged on the left-hand side, and he was conscious but not making much sense. He was very much drifting in and out of consciousness. Now, all 3 of us on this trip had done first aid, and we sort of kicked into gear in terms of making sure that we got him into the recovery position and monitoring his breathing. We were then concerned for any sort of potential spinal damage that might be at play. We didn't want to remove his helmet at that stage because he had a neck brace on that he was wearing as part of his motorcycle get-up, and we thought that would provide some rigidity to his neck as we knew that we would have to move him at one point. We were also travelling not during the school holidays, and these are roads that when you're travelling on them, not during peak tourist season, it can be days sometimes without a car travelling down them.
So he could have been there for days.
He absolutely
was so lucky that you'd actually seen the marks on the road and even identified that somebody had gone off. He could have laid there forever.
He could have laid there, and that is one of the problems with doing solo motorcycle adventure riding, is that you are a pretty small dot on the map. You're a lot smaller than a car is, so if anything goes wrong and nobody knows where you are, you can be quite difficult to find. So we were very fortunate that we were able to find him. You could not see him from the road unless you were really quite looking hard over the edge of this culvert. We knew once we sort of stabilised him that we would need obviously a lot more help. There was no phone reception. I knew that there was phone reception in Birdsville, but I knew that Birdsville was sort of still 3.5, 4 hours drive away. Right. But I had an HF radio, and an HF radio is a radio that allows you to basically carry out really quite long-range communications in remote areas. And I'm a member of a volunteer group called VKS 737, and it's run by volunteers throughout the country. But it also enables me to essentially hold down a button on my radio for 7 seconds. And if I hold that down, it will beacon call out to the Royal Flying Doctor. So I'd been told about this, but I'd never used it before. I knew that I had that capability. So I ran back down to the car and I sat in the seat and pushed that button and just waited to see what would happen.
That radio was also communicating your location?
No.
Is that the way it works?
No, it wasn't communicating our location. It was literally just a voice relay system. So you could only use it to communicate voice messages.
Okay.
Back in this was in the mid 2010s, there wasn't really an economical satellite phone service available, which is why I had the HF and still have the HF. But I pushed that button down and waited. And within probably about 10 to 15 seconds, a voice crackled over the radio. And it was initially the Royal Flying Doctor, actually in Darwin, who, when he worked out where we were, was able to patch us through, or rather patch representatives from Adelaide, from the Flying Doctor, onto the radio call. And I sort of said, I'm travelling. We've come across a motorcyclist on the Birdsville track. We're approximately 2.5 hours north of Mungarunny, approximately 4.5 hours south of Birdsville. He is, essentially drifting in and out of consciousness, has potential head injury, has no other visible blood injuries that we can see. But, we're seeking advice as to what we do. We have no phone reception. And I was essentially very calmly told to wait and that they would get back to me. So we sort of sat there for what felt like an eternity. But within about 4 minutes, they were back onto me. And they said, look, we've liaised with South Australian Emergency Services. This is an evacuation that we're going to carry out. We've also found that there is a station, I believe it was Clifton Springs or something along those lines.
Clifton Hill?
Clifton
Hill?
Hill, yeah. Yeah.
Clifton Hill, I've done an interview with the manager of Clifton Hill stations. It's one of the largest stations in the world.
There you go.
And his name is Peter Nunn, and absolutely amazing, and they have their own strip there and so forth. So, yeah, it sounds like you got onto Peter Nunn.
Yeah, potentially. We didn't actually speak with them directly. This all sort of came through the radio from the RFDS base, and they essentially told us that they had an airstrip and that they would be waiting for us to let us in. They then gave us some brief advice and pretty fundamental advice on how to transport this guy. They wanted to know what vehicles we had. I told them that I had a Land Rover Ute, and I think the RFDS person, not realising that I had a Land Rover 110 Ute, sort of assumed that I had a Ute that we could put a body in the back of quite easily. The Land Rover 110 back is sort of about the size of a pallet. So we had to unload everything out of the vehicle. And then we sort of made a makeshift stretcher, which was made out of a camp mattress, and then also some recovery track boards that I had in the car. And we sort of had one guy sitting in the back with him with the tailgate down and the rear wheel swing arm open.
Wow.
And two of us in the front sort of going very gingerly, probably at about 40 to 50 kilometres an hour along the road, and headed towards Clifton Hill.
Did you have to leave all of your gear behind?
Yeah, we left 2 motorcycles, his motorcycle, which was still in the ditch, the 2 motorcycles that were with me, and all the gear that was in the back by the side of the Birdsville track. So
Right.
There may have been some confused looks coming up and finding these 2 bikes standing upright, parked beside a large pile of gear, but that's just what we had to do. And I'll say that when we returned, all of it was still there and accounted for, so there were no dramas on that front. But we motored up along the track at a pretty steady pace. I said, mindful that every bump in that sort of scenario can cause and exacerbate any medical dramas. And when we arrived at Clifton Hill, I got to say there wasn't much sort of friendly, hey, how you going, mate, at the gate. It was more sort of, get the hell through, the plane's on the way, the strip's up that way, yada, yada, yada. So we motored through and Probably took us about another 10, 15 minutes once we were on Clifton Hill to get to the actual airstrip. And we followed the manager's ute, arrived, then waited. And the wait was probably about another 15 to 20 minutes. So obviously the plane was in the air, pretty soon
Yeah.
after we put our call through. And I can tell you that it was coming in towards sunset. And one of the amazing things about spaces out west is the silence, and you just have this moment of silence, not a bird, nothing in the background, no engines, no nothing. And then you hear it. And you just hear this noise on the horizon, and I don't think I had realised up until that point how personally anxious I was about this situation. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I knew this guy wasn't in a healthy way, and I knew that he needed a lot of help. All of a sudden, I kind of realised that it was just us doing this in the moment that I heard the plane coming down in for its landing. And as you watch this speck grow larger and larger against that pinky blue sky as it comes closer to you, you just get filled more and more with hope and sort of this release that help is arriving, and help that knows exactly what it's doing and knows a lot more than you do to help this guy out. I must say, I don't think we even knew the man's name at this point.
Wow.
So we hadn't even had much of a chance to search through his belongings and find his wallet or anything. His wallet did end up going with him on the plane. The plane landed on a dirt strip and turned round, and we had at that stage transferred him from my ute into the station ute, which had a much longer tray. It was a 70 series Land Cruiser. And we sort of drove the ute over towards the plane as the staff were stepping off it. They weren't rushed, they weren't panicked, but they were quick and efficient. And it was clear that they knew exactly what they were doing. One of them spoke immediately to me to find out what we'd done and to find out what condition he was in when we came across him, and key if there'd been any change since that time. And the other one immediately started basically doing close observations of him and making sure that we essentially hadn't missed anything like a blood wound or anything like that. I would say that he was back in the plane probably within about 5 or 6 minutes, and they were off. And I have this distinct memory of watching this plane and seeing the dust as it took off, and sort of standing there next to this station owner. And I can't remember this man's name, but he had said basically nothing to us the entire time. It was sort of directions with hands and that sort of thing, and a grunt here and there, and a few profanities thrown in.
That wasn't Peter Nunn, because he's a man of many words.
Right, okay. Well, I just remember this guy basically hadn't said anything. As the plane was taking off, he's sort of standing there beside me with his hands on his hips, and he just sort of looked over at me, and his eyes went wide, and he said, "Want a beer?" And I was like, sure, we'll have a beer. So we ended up staying the night there. And when I got into Birdsville the next day, I had a missed call on my mobile, and it was actually from someone at the Adelaide base just leaving me a message to let me know that he had arrived alive, and that he had some surgery and was recovering well. So it was kind of a bit of a good story all round, because I suppose the other thing is when someone like that disappears into a plane, you have no idea of what the outcome is. And we were all very mindful that was, someone's husband or brother or son, or all of the above. So to get that news was really terrific.
Wow, that's a great yarn. And you've really sort of described the experience that I've heard from a number of people that talk about the relief of when they hear the plane coming. I think we grow a little complacent in the cities because you've got health services so close by all the time. If something goes wrong, you can pick it up with the phone and call 000 and an ambulance will show up, or you can take somebody to the ED and they'll be looked at pretty quickly. But when you're in such a remote area, such as remote South Australia where you were on the Birdsville track, it's such a different scenario. And I'm really glad that you found that man. Did you manage to finish that trip with no further adventures or challenges?
Yes, no, managed to. Arrived in Birdsville, and I split off with the motorcycles from there and managed to arrive in Doomadgee quite safe and sound. I think your point just in terms of, a lack of knowledge just about how sparse the gaps are between services and availability in remote areas is a good one, Lana. I think for a lot of people in the cities and on the coast, there is little concept. Understandably, it's not front of mind because it's not something that you're having to deal with. But I think as well, it's not just for people who live in these areas, it's for people who travel through these areas. And I would really encourage
Yeah.
anyone and everyone to travel through these parts of Australia. And when you do that, the flying doctor will be there to provide services should you need it. And we hope that you don't need it. But if you do, that's what they're there for.
So do you have future plans for 2025 in terms of either four-wheel driving or motorcycle trips?
Oh, look, I've always got plans. I've got wish lists a mile long. A lot of places that I want to go back and see. A lot of places that I'm still yet to see. I think in 2025 I'm going to try and do a motorcycle trip down to Victorian High Country, and then potentially in 2026 I want to do the Darling River Run, which is a nice little run from Walgett down to Victoria through Central West New South Wales. So that's a great drive for anyone who's listening. I would highly recommend it.
Have you, Doug, ever heard of the motorcycle pudding?
The motorcycle pudding? No, I haven't. I'm
Yeah.
interested though.
All right. Well, I have to bring you up to speed on it. As I said at the very beginning, we did a whole interview with Steve Chalor on the motorcycle pudding in episode number 28. An amazing tale of back in the 70s, two men, very, very much avid motorcycle riders, one from Adelaide and one from Western Australia, decided to meet on the border town or on the border between WA and SA. They each rode respectively, and they each had packed their planned meal to have while they camped together and had a catch up. And there was a Big Sister self-sourcing chocolate pudding. You know those cans?
Yes.
And that one of the riders, I think his name was Bear, he'd brought it along and they didn't end up eating it. And so the conversation sort of went, oh, well, let's bring it along next time.
It started as legitimate food and never got eaten. So it was sort of a bit of a joke where, after a few times, and it's just carried on and on and on over the years. It might sit on someone's mantelpiece for, a month or so, and then it'd thrown back in a pannier and off it'd go trotting around the country somewhere.
So we're talking from the mid-70s to now, 2025. This pudding continues to travel, and the pudding inside has somehow dried up to a point where when you shake it, it actually rattles now. I don't think you'd be able to consume it. And the rules with the pudding are that it cannot travel by four wheels. It can only travel by two wheels.
It used to get auctioned off or, to a highest bidder to carry the pudding as a bit of a joke.
The money that is raised goes to the Royal Flying Doctor Service. And this has been going for decades. And this motorcycle pudding has its own Facebook page. It has a significant following and it has some amazing tales.
Turns up just about every year at the border village. Basically, that's where it originated, where Eric and Bear got together, makes a bit of a pilgrimage. And it's just carried on and on and on over the years. It's a lot of sort of legend.
And it's quite a privilege to bid and win the pudding and to be the holder of the pudding until the next meet. It's quite sought after.
Number one, I think that that entire concept just goes to show how special us motorcycle riders are, that we would be so conscious of weight, but happy to adopt a pudding that we can't eat and carry it with us.
That's right.
Number two, I just think it's a great example of little fundraising efforts from communities like motorcyclists, but also there could be fishermen, there could be outback travellers, outback communities who get together and do some really unique things to raise money and raise awareness and raise support for the Flying Doctor and the work that's done on the ground. So I think that's a terrific example. I will be looking out for the pudding. If I grab it, I've already got some trips in mind, and I will very happily give up 1 kilogram of weight space for this most hallowed of tasks.
This treasured pudding. So in Western Australia, apparently they're doing the same thing with a can of beer. So there's also somewhere that we look forward to hearing if anybody can track down the can of beer that is also travelling with motorcyclists in Western Australia. We're definitely keen to learn of its whereabouts.
Yes, I'm also aware of another phenomenon with a travelling bottle of galah piss, which is actually red wine from the Glargenbone Caravan Park, which you can purchase there. And this wine is currently travelling with some friend of ours, and it's sort of passed on at every remote campsite that you come to some more travellers. It has its own Facebook page and following. So some quite
That's
unique
amazing.
some quite unique things happen in outback Australia.
My perspective and understanding of the motorcycle community has completely changed since I've been doing the Flying Doctor podcast. They're amazing,
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with us today, Doug. We might stay in touch with you as you continue your adventures. Listeners may very well hear your voice again in the future when you can update us on your latest forays into the outback on two wheels.
No worries.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with family and friends and subscribe and follow, and then you'll never miss the next adventure. For all the details on how you can share your story with us, join our Facebook group and donate to the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Check out the show notes for details. The Flying Doctor podcast is recorded on Ngunnawal land. It's produced by Sophie Campbell, edited by Mandy Coolin, and I'm your host, Lana Howarth. Catch you next time.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks again to our sponsor and major national partner, Isuzu Ute Australia. Isuzu Ute is committed to supporting the communities in which the RFDS operates. To learn more, search Isuzu Ute online. With over 120 episodes, you can listen to more incredible Flying Doctor Outback adventures whenever you like. New episodes are released every week, so tune in next time to hear another unmissable Australian story. This is the Flying Doctor Podcast.